Does she have a personal email we can send it to? We can try that.
Let's see.
So the person we're communicating with actually has a person that she's communicating with that's doing the captioning. So we're communicating with Cindy, but Lorraine is actually the person doing the captioning. We don't have an email.
So can we get a different email for Lorraine? Because the email it's going to right now is info@hometeamcaptions, but if we can try a different one.
Hey, Karen, what's the meeting ID for this?
Okay.
It doesn't work that way. It's an individualized
No. Okay,
link
so
that gets sent out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I
would have to send out a link to that person, and they would have to log in. Do you want to give me an email, and Karen can try to send a link? Can you send a link out to someone once the webinar is started?
Yep.
I just need an email.
So Kathy's got an email she's going to give us. She's on the phone with someone right now who wants to join. So.
Kate, are you able to email Cart?
So we're about 40 seconds from starting.
Yeah. Right.
I just need the email address to send it to.
Dennis,
so do you want me to say, since we're close, do you want me to say something about we're having some issues with Cart, but we're trying to fix them?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay.
And Dennis, maybe you could chat the email to Kate, and she can email them if you get it.
I forwarded her an email that has the email in it. So.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Kate.
I'm going to start the recording now.
All right. Mine is already started, and I will be starting right now.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends in Disability Employment,
or nTIDE,
Lunch and Learn series.
Just a few housekeeping items before we begin.
This webinar is being recorded.
We will post an archive of each webinar each month on our website at www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE.
This site will also provide copies of the presentations, the speakers' bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources.
As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer.
To ask questions of the speakers, click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box.
Speakers will review these questions and provide answers during the last section of the webinar.
Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A box.
If you have any questions following this recording, please contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu
or toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information.
Thanks for joining us.
Enjoy today's webinar.
Morning, everybody. I'm Denise Roselle. Clearly, I am not Andrew Houghtonville. Andrew is elsewhere this morning and hopefully will be joining us later. But I'm Denise Roselle from the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, and I will be the moderator today. So why don't we go to the first slide. This is the monthly Lunch and Learn. It occurs at noon Eastern on the day the nTIDE report is released. It's a joint effort of the UNH Institute on Disability, the Kessler Foundation, and the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. As part of the RRTC, the Rehab and Research Training Center on Employment Policy and Measurement, which is funded by NIDLR, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehab Research. Next slide. Let's walk through exactly what we're going to do today. So the first part of this is going to be the nTIDE monthly report, going through the numbers. And John O'Neill from the Kessler Foundation and Andrew, if we see him, are going to be doing that part. The second part, I will come back again, and I have some kind of nTIDE news from the field, things that are studies or research or policy, things that you all should know about. Third part, our guest speaker today is Ellie Hartman, who is from the Wisconsin Promise Project. We've gotten some requests from you all to do something on Promise. So this is an update on what's going on the Promise Project. And then Q&A. So I'll ask you, we will be doing Q&A throughout, meaning we'll be looking at the Q&A box. So if you want to write in Q&A as we go, that'd be great. But then we'll take all the questions at the end for all of the speakers. Next slide. I was going to say that we were having problems with CART, but it looks like CART is there. Yay, thank you very much. And I'm going to toss it to John for the nTIDE report. Go ahead, John, let's do the numbers.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. Next slide, please. The monthly nTIDE report is a press release and an infographic looking at the latest employment statistics. Uses data from the jobs report release by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on the first Friday of every month. And as we've mentioned in the past, it's a joint effort between the Kessler Foundation and the University of New Hampshire. Next slide, please. The data source is the current population survey, which is fielded every month by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the source of the unofficial employment rate. And we report on civilian ages 16 to 64 not living in institutions. And this information has been available since 2008 onward. This data is not yet seasonally adjusted, which is why we compare it to the same month last year. Next slide, please. I'm going to be doing the numbers as Andrew's not here today. So next slide, please. We look at the employment to population ratio. That is essentially the number of people who are employed relative to the total population. And this particular month, for people with disabilities, the employment to population ratio went up to 29.9%, which is related back to January of last year, where it was at 27.1%. That's up 10.3% or 2.8 points. For people without disabilities, the employment to population ratio went up only slightly from 72.4% last year to 72.7% this year. And that's up 0.4% or 0.3 points. So people without disabilities, as has been the case for a number of months now, their improvement has outstripped those without disabilities. Next slide, please. We also look at the labor force participation rate. Now, the labor force participation rate includes those who are working, but also those who are looking for work. And for people with disabilities, it went up from 30.8% from last year, January, to 33% this month, which is up 7.1% or 2.2 points. For people without disabilities, there was actually a slight decrease in the labor force participation rate. It went from 76.2% in January 2017 to 76.1% this month. It's down 0.1% or 0.1 points. 0.1 points. Next slide, please. This slide is a graphic representation of the employment to population ratio. Remember, that's the just literally the number of people who are employed relative to the total population. And so it's two graphs. The top graph, which is in blue, represents people without disabilities, and the bottom graph represents people with disabilities. And this is from 2008 onward. And I think the next slide would probably be a good representation of what we want to summarize today. For people without disabilities, you see a slump, a slump in the grade from 2008 to about the beginning of 2012, and you start to see a gradual increase in the employment to population ratio all the way up until this month. For people with disabilities, you see that there's a gradual decline from 2008 almost to the beginning of 2016. During 2016 and 2017, we've seen a gradual increase in the employment to population ratio. We've actually seen at this point 22 months of continuous improvement in the employment to population ratio for people with disabilities. This may be due to a tightening labor market, such that employers are recruiting more broadly and including people with disabilities. Okay, I think that's it for my presentation, and I'll hand it back to Denise.
Thanks, John. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, flip the next slide too. That's great. There we go. So the federal update. So I've already introduced myself to you, so I'm just going to jump right in. What do you need to know that's going on federal policy-wise? I try to keep you updated on this each month, and particularly since we talked about it last month, that there was a continuing resolution that was going to end. I thought I'd better bring it back to you this month and say, yes, there's another continuing resolution that is about to end. So as of right now, the continuing resolution that is funding the government will expire on February 8th, coming up just in a few days. They probably will not have a deal for a big omnibus or for a budget or for appropriations or anything else. In all likelihood, the only thing they're going to have a deal for here in Washington is to extend yet again in another continuing resolution. I have here 1 week or more on the slide. Last I heard it could be a month. I was hearing some kind of a March date yesterday when I was talking to folks. So it's likely that the continuing resolution that we're currently operating under is going to continue into next month. It is unlikely we're going to see another federal shutdown at this point, but again, that's always possible if they can't figure out a deal to at least get the continuing resolution passed. And I also just want to remind you that continuing resolution just means we're continuing under the same numbers that we've been under. So it's a continuation of whatever it was passed last year in last year's appropriation bills. What we're trying to do now is pass appropriations bills to fund the government for services, well, for the work they've been doing, frankly, since October 1st. We're into this fiscal year now. It could be a full year CR. They might pass a full year, meaning it would go from March through the end of the fiscal year and maybe the next year. We just don't know. The next problem would be that right now, as you probably remember, or maybe you don't, if you're not a Washington geek, we're currently operating under what's called a sequestration, which means several years ago, the Congress passed a bill that said that there would be overall cuts, across the board cuts each year at certain amounts as we got further and further out from the bill. So that's a very strange way to say there are some overarching cuts. If they don't give relief to the sequestration, there will be automatic across the board cuts, even to whatever is passed by the appropriations, by the House and Senate for appropriations. So they have to pass relief to that sequestration in order to not have additional cuts on top of whatever else is passed. There are still 2 years left in that sequestration. I know this is a lot in the weeds, but the bottom line is there could be more cuts no matter what happens, even if they pass a continuing resolution exactly for what we've been under already. There are cuts. Okay, so the next one, the bills that they're working on now are predominantly level funding, except for the sequestration. The big conversation that's happening now is, even if they pass something to lift the sequestration, would they lift it for defense and non-defense both? Only for non-defense? And if they lift it only for non-defense, obviously non-defense, which is what we care about for the services we provide, gets cut even harder. We're just going to have to wait and see. I'm sorry to tell you that that's just where we are, but we're waiting. And the more that we hear, and the more time that goes by, the more we know. But this changes by the day. So there are things coming. Keep your eyes open. And that's why I said I try to update you every month. The president's budget is due out February 12th. Now, that's the budget for next year. But meaning starting in October 2018 through September 30th, 2019, his budget is due out February 12th. It may contain per capita caps on Medicaid. It may contain additional work requirements. It may contain welfare reform. The House has been talking about welfare reform. So keep your eyes on that as well. There's, if it includes caps on Medicaid, we're going to be having the same conversations that we had last summer about what the ramifications are to caps on Medicaid and to the Medicaid programs, waivers, and a lot of other programs, obviously, the services that we care about. Well, so that was not very happy news. Let's flip to the next slide. Let's go on. What else is going on? I was really pleased to see a couple of studies come out this month or last month. This one's actually a little older, around mental health, because we don't always hear as much about mental health research in employment or in other issues as we probably should. We don't always focus as much on mental health. So this one is on mental health and juvenile justice. Again, I thought this was really important for those of you on this call to hear. It's a prevalence study on prevalence, promising practices, and areas for improvement. It was done by National Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Neglected or Delinquent Children and Youth. Given the amount of people, I'm guessing on this call, who care about transition services, this would be an important one to look at. It looks at the prevalence of mental health issues across the juvenile justice population. We all know that the disabilities across the juvenile justice population are really high. This one targets specifically mental health disorders. And this is one of those where if you're in this field, if you're in the mental health arena, if you're in the employment transition arena, this is one that I think I would just stick in my file to have, so that we can talk about it and use it in ways that might be helpful in legislation or policy in the future. That's enough about that one. Next slide. There we go. This is another one. This is a NIDE funded on workers with psychiatric disabilities and self-employment. There are 3 research-funded briefs. We've been waiting for these briefs to come out. One on the characteristics of businesses and business owners, one on being and becoming self-employed, and then one on planning for the future. A lot of folks, this one was interesting to me, particularly because it's targeted, all 3 of them are targeted for use with decision makers, policy makers, as well as practitioners and folks in the self-advocacy community. The survey was done in the summer of 2017, so it's really recent, and it was through the Self-Employment Starts With You, SESY, grant. And again, for folks with psychiatric disabilities, I don't think we see as much as we could around employment, and this one in particular targeting self-employment, which means apparently that definition is under 5 employees. So I thought that one was really interesting as well, and I commend that one to you. Next slide. So this one on VR employment outcomes of individuals with autism, this one is, again, it's targeted toward folks with autism, as opposed, a lot of times folks with autism are rolled into other disability categories. So this one was interesting to me. It's looking at, and I've always said I'm the policy geek, and the folks on the phone are the research people. You understand what that means when I say it's a hierarchical linear modeling analysis. It looks at, I know what it says is that it looks at 10 years of RSA data. So that was important. And they were looking at the predictors of employment outcomes for VR clients with autism. And what jumped out at me, and I'm sure you all can go look at all of this and understand it better than I, the total number of VR services that the client received, that was the only variable of significance across all 10 years. And other variables were predictive in 1 or more years, but that one in particular was across all 10. And that one may have, I would think, has ramifications for the work that we do with VR, the training perhaps that we do with VR around autism services, and potentially, again, from the policy geek point of view, for funding of VR services. Okay, next slide. I'm guessing that most of you saw this, but I just had to highlight it because I thought it was fabulous. The Journal of Voc Rehab has their December issue is all around partnerships in employment. There are 10 articles, all of them targeting these kinds of partnerships. 8 of them are very state specific, including one that our guest speaker, Ellie Hartman, is on was one of the authors when talking about Wisconsin. So they targeted 8 states. They talked a little bit in a different article about the PI grants and kind of the evaluation of that. Basically, it's looking at cross-agency, cross-discipline, including employers. What do you do in terms of building these partnerships? And the examples in the states are really good about how you go about building partnerships and the importance of building partnerships across agencies in the state, across disciplines, including employers, all the rest. And I certainly know, and I don't want to steal any of Ellie's thunder, I certainly know that part of what we're seeing in the Promise grants in the early work is that these partnerships make a huge difference. It also makes a huge difference. Frankly, I've seen it in other areas as well, and I'm sure you all understand that. But I wanted to draw it out and just say you might want to go pull your Journal of VR if you haven't looked at it yet for the December issue, and stick it on your table on the top of your reading pile. Okay, next one. This is another one that can be very state specific. ODEP on their Drive website has a new thing where you can subscribe. So if you go into the Drive Disability Employment website, you can sign up for very targeted alerts that get sent to you when anything you're interested in pops up on the ODEP site, on this site. You can do it by state. You can do it by service delivery system. You can do it on policy topics, in particular on data sets. There's a whole variety of ways that you can target and personalize what it is you want to hear about that's going on, and when it shows up on this website, it'll send you an email about it. I was really excited to see it because you can do it by state. I've said before in these webinars, I'm a state policy person. That's how I cut my teeth in the last 15 years. And so I'm always excited to see what's happening at the state level on particular issues. And frankly, it's particularly important now because not a lot is happening at the federal level. The work that's really happening on policy is happening at the state level. And on service delivery system reform, all of that is happening at the state level. So I would really recommend this to you. Go look at it, figure out what it is you're interested in, and set one up. I certainly just did this. Okay, next one. And then we got a couple of webinars. So I just wanted to highlight, this one is an NTACT webinar on, as you can see, it's called Need Evidence-Based Practices for Secondary Transition and Pre-ETS Implementation. So we're having lots of conversations, certainly in my office and on some of the projects I work on around pre-ETS implementation. So anything I see that talks about implementation of employment transition services under WIOA, I flag. So this one is about, as you can see the description, how to navigate the myriad of evidence-based and predictors for post-secondary success resources. Pre-ETS implementation, some online personal development through nTIDE, and this is on February 15th. You can go in and register for it. Shows you who the speakers are. I'm certainly going to be listening in on it to see if there's anything there that's helpful for the work that I'm doing. Next one more webinar. So this one is VR Counselor Transition Practices. This is another one, frankly, I signed up for as well. They took the perceptions of 538 VR counselors in 13 states, talking about success rates for transition age youth and things VR counselors are doing. And I think this is important. Again, we talk a lot about partnerships with vocational rehabilitation on transition practices, given the focus of WIOA on transition, given the focus for vocational rehabilitation, obviously, and given the focus of competitive integrated employment in WIOA and in transition and in, I could go on and on across the board. The paradigm shift, thank goodness, finally, to competitive integrated employment. This one should be important to see. What are VR counselors doing? What is successful? And then, frankly, for those of you who are not from the states where there are things happening that are successful, how can you help? What are things you can suggest? How might you be able to, like I said, ramifications for transition-related policy and practice? And we're looking at that from a policy point of view nationally for those of us who work in this area. And I'm guessing that for those of you who are working in states on this, that this would also be useful. Next slide. Yeah, that's what I thought. Last slide from me. This is one more time a save the date. And I'm hoping at this point it's not just a save the date, but a register and be on the lookout, and y'all come if you're in Washington. The 2017 Annual Disability Statistics Compendium is February 13th, 2018 at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. There's the link for how you can register. And then afterwards, be on the lookout for all the information that's going to be coming out. This is always exciting, and we're looking forward to it. I'm going to be there, along with a bunch of other people who are on this call, I'm sure. Okay, guest speaker. Let me introduce Ellie, and then I want to hand it over to her. I already told you that I work with Ellie around the Promise Grant. AUCD is the Technical Assistance Center for the Promise TA project, for the Promise Centers. So Ellie is the project manager for Wisconsin Promise. She is a senior scientist at the University of Wisconsin Stout Vocational Rehabilitation Institute. She spends 100% of her time on Promise, and for Wisconsin Promise's lead agency, which is the Wisconsin Division of Vocational Rehabilitation at the Department of Workforce Development. Ellie was also an evaluator for Wisconsin's Let's Get to Work grant. She received her PhD in educational psychology at the University of Minnesota and her bachelor's in psychology at the University of Wisconsin. Ellie is also a board certified behavior analyst. So I want to toss this to Ellie. We're really excited about some of the things we're hearing coming out of Promise already in the kind of the early years, but let her talk to you about what Promise is all about and what she's seeing. Ellie, I'm going to toss it to you.
Great, thanks, Denise. So yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll let everyone know about Wisconsin, or about Promise in general. Really, there's more than just Wisconsin participating in this great grant. So Promise stands for Promoting Readiness of Minors in Supplemental Security Income, and it's really a partnership, as Denise was talking about, the interagency partnership at both the federal and the state level. So you see the states received grants from the Department of Education. Social Security is leading the research effort with a contract with, or a grant with Mathematica, and the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, and as I mentioned, the Social Security Administration. They're all partnering at the federal level, and then we are doing the same types of partnerships at the state level. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's just a general overview of what we were tasked for, or what the grant is itself. It's to fund states to implement a model demonstration project, specifically to promote positive outcomes in education, employment, and financial self-sufficiency for teenagers who receive supplemental security income, or SSI, and their families. And as a reminder, to receive SSI, youth need a disability determination from Social Security, and then they meet the income threshold. So many of the youth and families, when a youth is receiving SSI, are living in poverty or near poverty levels. Promise is intended to, as Denise mentioned, improve the coordination of the services and supports that the child or teenager receiving SSI and their families receive, in order to increase these outcomes. So we know what kinds of services help to increase employment, and each state, or grant, I should say, and I'll tell you which ones those are in a second here, was tasked to combine resources within the state to achieve these outcomes, specifically targeting specific services. As I mentioned, the outcomes are graduating from high school, ready for college and a career, completing post-secondary education and job training, obtaining competitive employment in integrating settings, and then as a result of all that, increasing both youth and family financial self-sufficiency. Next slide. Here are all the awardees. Most of them are single state grants, like Wisconsin, so Wisconsin Promise. There's also Maryland Promise, Arkansas Promise, Cobb Promise, or California Promise, and New York has State Promise as well. And then there's a consortium of states out west called Aspire. Utah is the lead over there, and then they work with the Dakotas, Colorado, Arizona, and I feel like I'm missing one. There's 6 different Western consortium of Western states out there. So they work together in a single research model. So not only are they doing interagency collaboration within their state, but across states. Next slide. So all of the states were tasked to enroll at least 2,000 youth, 14, 15, and 16, when they enrolled, receiving SSI and their families. It is a model demonstration project. It is a treatment control design. So half received services as usual, and the other half received promise services. And these are all based on the guideposts to success, really. And so each state does it slightly differently, but they're the same core services. So employment services being the #1, as employment is the biggest predictor with youth, is the biggest predictor of employment in adulthood. So looking at least one paid job in the community while still in high school, preferably 2. So that's, I'll get into this, but the Wisconsin model is through the Division of Voc Rehab. So they're working with a VR counselor and connecting with employment services, job placement, trial work experiences, supported employment, customized employment, other types of services to connect to those jobs. And that's our #1 priority. And then in addition, youth are receiving SSI, and youth or families might not know what happens to benefits when you start working. Are you still going to get the supports you need? There's lots of questions and fears around that. So work incentive benefits counseling is a key component, as is financial coaching. So it's not only understanding benefits and earning income, but building assets. And so we have financial coaching because we're thinking about financial self-sufficiency. And then social skills training. So we're using the Department of Labor Skills to Pay the Bills curriculum, and then doing some classes like that, trainings like that, but also right on the job social skills training. That direct experience of practicing those social skills on the job is super important. And then we're also helping promote advocacy because we're trying to increase independence, financial self-sufficiency. And so we provide families with family advocacy, how to navigate systems, how to advocate for services and supports either the youth needs or they need, and then the youth, providing them with self-advocacy training as well. And then Wisconsin does some health promotion with the youth. It's part of our trauma-informed care, talking about stress, sleep, eating, exercise, all those things, taking care of yourself to help reduce the impact that trauma might have on everyday life. Next slide. So in Promise, we're providing services for at least 2.5 years for both youth and the family. So not only is it interagency, making sure the youth get to all the services, but also connecting family members, because these are families, as I mentioned, to be on SSI, you have to have that meet that income requirement, and that's for the whole family. So often family members are underemployed as well. So working with family members as well. As I mentioned, Wisconsin's model is through our DVR, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Other states have other models that go through schools, mental health services, through their service providers or the lead agency. There's all kinds of different models that each state does. In Wisconsin, we wanted to do it right through Voc Rehab. The nice thing about that, especially with WIOA, which was put into law right after Promise started, was we can also pay for services through regular VR funds. So we can do that with youth and concentrate a lot of our funds with family members. And then it's interagency, so partnerships with DVR, schools, mental health programs, long-term care programs, child welfare, and really working together not only at the state level, but also at the local level. So at the local level, our counselors are building resource teams and tracking them, or they may have already exist, but making sure we have a record of who that resource team is and collaborating, especially with schools, but also with all these other partners as well. And feel free, we've got a great part of the grant. We wanted to have materials that were readily accessible to youth and families. So we have a website, promisewi.com. You'll notice it's not a government website. And we have a lot of materials that are easy to read, visually appealing, videos, fun things like that. So feel free to check it out. Next slide. Just kind of sense of where we're at with services. So in Wisconsin, we make sure we connect, or at least try to connect with all our youth and families at least once every 30 days, if not more. We did eligibility quickly, so it's about rapid engagement, making sure we have those face-to-face connections, and we have actually now over 880 individual plans for employment written. So not only have we met with the youth, but we are moving forward on their individual plans for employment. In fact, for a couple youth, we're already talking about successful closures. Not a lot, but a couple. And then we have identified 877 of those family resource teams. So those are the interagency teams, not only for the youth, but for family members. And then we're working with the family members. So we have 415 different family service plans written for 550 different family members. So a youth, on a single youth case, we have 415 different service plans, but a youth might have multiple family members we're working with. So that's why there's more family members than plans. And we also have 87 family members working with their own regular VR case. Next slide. This is just saying where our services are at. So many have met with a family advocate already, met with their benefits specialist, financial coach. About half, just under half, have met with those different folks. Youth are starting their savings account. I don't have a lot of time to get into it, but if you're interested, we do have Promise individual development accounts that youth are opening, and that's a nice extra feature in Wisconsin specifically. 345 youth have completed our skills to pay the bills training that we're doing. Almost 300 youth have completed self-advocacy, and it's over 200 now that have done our health promotion modules. Next slide. So when we started at enrollment, 302 of our family members and 16 youth were working. As of, actually, I have numbers as of today. I looked at them. I can't help myself. 602 family members are now working, or have worked since enrollment, I should say, and 501 Promise youth, so half of our youth so far, and those numbers continue to go up every day. And now 86 youth have graduated from high school to date, and 32 family members had some kind of educational attainment since enrolling in Promise. Next slide. And then this, just some more outcomes. You'll see that active jobs for family members went from 315 to 547. And they've had 769 different jobs, so they're trying different jobs. Averaging 30 hours a week. These are siblings or parents, so there's a range there, and they're averaging $12.39 an hour. Youth, you'll see when they're, I said, over 500 have had a job. Most of them who have had a job have had more than one. So they've had 862 different jobs. 219 are active. That's gone up a little bit to averaging 19 hours a week. So when they're working, they're working. And then averaging 8.75 per hour. Next slide. So just checking on, okay, we're good. I'm checking on my time here quick. So some lessons learned, looking at state and local interagency collaborations. One of the questions the feds, specifically Social Security, Department of Ed, have been asking, are there additional partners? So we know voc rehab, schools, job centers, Medicaid, long-term care, mental health. Those are all important partners, and we in Wisconsin have had an interagency collaboration between those partners for a while now. Are there additional partners? And the adding of the Department of Children and Families, which includes our TANF program and our child welfare, has been a great addition. It was part of the requirement to have the TANF agency and partnership, and we see a lot of overlap between our Promise youth receiving SSI, and the child welfare population, actually. So there's a lot of great collaboration happening there. In addition, juvenile justice has moved over to that department for Wisconsin, and we have found some of our youth are in the juvenile justice system, and so increasing collaboration with them has been another valued partner. So we're happy to have added that partner through Promise, and now we do so more on a regular basis through other projects as well. Being employment focused, as I mentioned before, is our number one thing. If we're talking about financial self-sufficiency, that's the best way to do that. That's why we have our model through VR, because our counselors are employment focused, and then they can provide that service for youth, but also for family members. And then to support that, there's the benefits consultation. So rather than doing a full-blown benefits analysis, sometimes that's what's needed, but sometimes it's almost too much information all at once. We've found ongoing consultation, meeting families where they're at, answering their questions where they're at, and moving forward has been a good model for youth especially. So we're using that a lot now with Promise, and we've actually extended that into regular VR as an option. I mentioned financial capability building. We have our Promise IDAs, individual development accounts, so helping youth to save. So if youth save $1,000, if they save $250 towards a goal, to save up to something to help them with their education or employment goals, so a car, technology, maybe camera, other things to help with their goals. If they save $250, we'll match $1,000 and then help purchase that item. So that's encouraging saving and banking to help build those financial behaviors now, so that they continue to do so even after Promise. Promise implementation has helped Wisconsin VR with their WIOA implementation. Skills to Pay the Bills is now incorporated in our youth work-based learning. The training of the different social skills right on the job has been important piece. We've learned, like, yes, you can take those classes, but sometimes youth aren't making connection to the job, or they're not working and not making the connection to the job. So having that on-the-job training has been an important component, as has having an option to practice those skills with your peers in Skills to Pay the Bills. That's one of the WIOA are the PREET services now available in Wisconsin VR. Our self-advocacy training also helped inform what VR has done with PREETs here in Wisconsin. And then looking at the whole family. So, for example, in one part of the state, we had a mom who was actually wanted to get in the control group, usual services group, because she didn't think her son could work. And as we were working with her, we used a lot of motivational interviewing, really understanding what her concerns were, taking it at her pace, and then just trying something out. And when we did that, she saw work was possible for him. And when she saw work was possible for him, she saw work was possible for herself. And so she went back to pursuing her accounting degree that she had put on hold for a while. So the importance of helping both the youth and the family has been an important piece of Promise, and it's one piece we're not quite sure how that will be sustained in states after Promise, and so we're trying to look into what those possibilities are. Next slide. Case management has been an important component. So youth receiving SSI don't automatically get case management. They might be part of programs that have case management in them. They might have an individual education plan. They might have in VR with a individual plan for employment, long-term care. They might have a plan. They don't necessarily have a plan or someone to a case manager. And so having that case manager to help navigate systems and connect to services and supports has been a big piece of Promise. It also helps connecting to a work incentive benefits counselor and local Social Security for better implementation of existing work incentives. And it's important that our case management is not, is really about empowering youth and families, not trying to do it, not trying to solve problems for families. When you do that, you seem to get in a cycle of emergency after emergency, and instead focus on their strengths and empowering youth and families, and recognizing the good work, connecting with a good job, connecting with the community. Our youth and families in Promise really bring a lot to the table, and recognizing what they're bringing and empowering them to move forward with those skills, or get connected with services that will help highlight those. Talked about employment focused, trauma informed, the rapid engagement. We're proactive. We're connecting with our youth and families in multiple ways. So text, phone calls, knocking on doors, meeting the families where they're at. And we actually found in Wisconsin Promise that postcards, things that you can read on the way to the trash can, visually appealing message, and then a way to get more information right on a postcard, has been not only a really good way to get our youth and families enrolled in Promise, but then continuing with services. So that's been an interesting lesson learned. Who would think postcards would be a way to do that? And then I talked about one-on-one consultation, coaching, and mentoring, really meeting families where they're at and providing them information that's relevant to them now versus trying to inundate them with a ton of information at once. And then trainings when they're interactive, people can try things out rather than passive listening to information. So interactive trainings and opportunities to network with each other are the best types of trainings for our youth and families. Next slide. Some other pieces we're doing, we are doing some capacity building around customized and supported employment, because we found we had youth on waiting lists or not enough employment providers for that. So we're helping increase capacity, so we have that more readily available for our Promise youth and families. And the nice thing is that will continue on beyond Promise, so kind of building that infrastructure that can be maintained with existing state funds beyond Promise. Let's see here, looking at how we improve service delivery and accessibility for this population. So a lot of our trainings were set up in ways, like I said, they were these trainings where you got a lot of information at once, rather more than the more interactive or meeting people where they're at, one-on-one kind of deal. And so we're finding what's working for this population. We're doing a lot of interagency data sharing with all these partners in this big, huge research project, and we want to not only do that for Promise, but think beyond that. And then in Promise, we have what are called community conversations. So it's not only about working with the youth, but also connecting the community and empowering the community to come up with local ways to help increase employment for youth with disabilities right in their community. So movers and shakers, employers, going to community centers or different events to ask that question of themselves and problem solve at the community level. And we really see when the community is participating, we get better impact. Next slide. And I mentioned this, so one of our key pieces is that family services. This is really important when we're thinking about breaking that cycle of poverty, not only helping the youth, but also helping the youth family members and household members reach their financial self-sufficiency goals. And we're not quite sure how to continue that good work. It's an important component of Promise, and trying to figure that out is a big question right now. So next slide. And I mentioned we have some videos. These are short 3 to 4 minute video clips and done by a local media center here in Wisconsin, Pop Up Media. And so check them out. We've got 5 different youth stories available. If you go actually on our homepage right now, Raina's story is featured around trauma-informed care. This is when we were featuring Craig, but you can also, you'll see there's a more videos link. You can click right on that and see Craig. He's in Milwaukee. We've got a couple Milwaukee youth, Craig and Robert, and we've got Avi up in the Green Bay area. And then we have Cody more in the kind of near Milwaukee, but more outside that area in the southeast corner, in a little more rural area than the other youth. But go ahead, check out these stories and watch the videos, and you really get a sense of what impact Promise has had. But not only that, but how awesome these youth are. Like I said, they're all bringing such wonderful things to the table. The youth and then the community around them, as like the teacher in Cody's video, or the mentor in Raina's video, you'll see that there's different folks in their community, and then of course themselves and their families that are really helping make this happen. And Promise is just helping to connect all those pieces and really empower folks. That's our goal. So check out the videos if you want to see it from a youth perspective. Next slide. And there's my contact information. Any questions?
Hey, Ellie, that was fabulous. Thanks. One of the questions that's come through, and not a surprise to you, is about sustainability. And I know you touched on that, but what happens after Promise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's something we're talking a lot about right now. So it is a research demonstration grant, so really finding out what works and helping inform practice at both the state and the federal level. So it's not something that's meant to live on as it is, but we're supposed to learn, what does work and why. And so I know not only Wisconsin, but the other states are trying to figure out how best to share what is working with policymakers, with our stakeholders in the state, federally, to really kind of think of implications of what we're learning and how these things will live on beyond Promise.
Another one just came in too, and I would remind people, if you've got questions for Ellie, go ahead and put them in the chat box. That's where or the Q&A box, sorry. That's what we're using. So Ellie, there's another one here. It says, do the folks at Promise know why the average number of hours worked by family members was reduced after involvement in the program?
Yeah, what we did was, I think at the beginning of the grant, that was mostly parents. And then we've helped a lot of siblings get jobs, and they might still be in high school. So we really need to break that out more by age to look at average hours worked. So I think most of it is explained by siblings who are still in high school.
There's another one here that says they love the Skills to Pay the Bills program, just so you know. So this one, let's see, can you talk a little about the role of trauma-informed care in the Promise program?
Sure, definitely. And I encourage you to watch that Raina video if that's your interest. But that was one piece we wanted to incorporate in being trauma-informed when we're talking to youth and families. So realizing that the way youth and families are engaging with us, maybe getting angry over something, or maybe not engaging at all, or maybe being hesitant about moving forward about something might stem from something trauma. It may or may not, but understanding that and knowing that and making the environment comfortable, or not assuming or taking things personally, and really trying to build those relationships and trust, and listen to youth and families and meeting them where they're at and moving forward from there, and really listening to youth and families how they want to move forward and taking that into consideration versus, okay, this is what needs to be done and this is how it needs to be done, because there's always flexibility in how you do that. And I should mention too, Wisconsin, this is a big initiative in Wisconsin. So First Lady Tanette Walker, this is a big initiative of hers in fostering futures. So she actually interviews our youth in the video, and there's a link to Fostering Futures in Wisconsin. And really that initiative is to make all services that youth are receiving, or individuals are receiving, especially youth, trauma-informed. So schools, juvenile justice, child welfare, VOC rehab, job centers, all of that is to be trauma-informed. So lots to check out there.
Thanks,
Ellie, this is John O'Neill. I have a question. Do you know to what degree the Promise programs are making use of Job Corps at all?
It's possible. So we, for example, ironically, Raina, again, was actually going through Job Corps through their getting trained as a nurse. So in that video, it's actually featured, but it's not, there's nothing systematic about it. So it's an option that's available for youth that our counselors might connect youth to, and I would assume is the same with the other states, but there was nothing systematic built in.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put it, there's a comment in the question box that I am going to emphasize just for a second, and because we haven't talked about it today, there is, and it's due today, so I don't know that anyone here will be writing their comments now, but maybe there is a request for information out from the Social Security Administration on strategies to improve adult outcomes for youth receiving supplemental security income. The comments are due today. And I know certainly AUCD is filing comments, I know, and both on behalf of the Promise TA Center and on behalf of AUCD, and a variety of other disability organizations and folks around the country are doing that. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure you can Google it. Like I said, it's an RFI from Social Security on strategies to improve adult outcomes. It's exactly what we've been talking about here. We don't obviously have all the answers yet from Promise because we don't have all the evaluations yet. But if it's something you're interested in, you have until, I can't remember, I think 5 o'clock Eastern. But anyway, so go pull it up someplace and toss something on the comment page. There's some good comments coming in, actually. There really are. Okay. Let's see what else. I also want to make sure that I say that just as Ellie's been talking about the Wisconsin Promise website, all of the projects have their own individual websites, and you can go search for those. There are some really good materials on all of them. Ellie in particular has a bunch of materials up from Wisconsin that are really usable. And she said this earlier, but really usable for other things, other information, how to share. And a lot of times I know we're really looking for information in easily understandable language, in plain language. or in culturally diverse, for culturally diverse populations or whatever. The Promise grants have really done a good job of that. I recognize in the question box, I recognize there's a frustration by a couple of folks, and I get that this doesn't go on. I'm totally with you. We've done a good demo project here, and we found best practices, and we're all still trying to figure out how to make that work in the long term, and how do we implement it, how do we sustain this. We know that these wraparound services work. We can now hopefully show that these wraparound services work. And it's that kind of a research project that we hope can influence policy in the future. I'm guessing that's not going to satisfy anybody on this call real well, and I get it, and I'm not sure it satisfies me. But at least now we have some real data to show, or we will have, we hope, how these things work. So anyway, that's just an addition from my part. Ellie, did you have anything to add to that? Or
Nope. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
We will continue to let folks know why it works and how it works, and let as many people know that as possible, and encourage everyone else on the call to do so as well. And hopefully that makes a difference.
Yep, it's a good launch. As again, I've said I'm a policy geek. It's the whole policy to practice or research to policy, and hopefully that's what will influence. Okay, I have time for one more question if there is one, but on the moment I don't see any other ones. So why don't we go ahead? Oops, wait. Can't wait to share this with my Virginia legislator. Exactly. So exactly. Use all of this information that you're hearing to share what's going on in other places. You can have individual states could figure out how to do this on their own. If you work with your own VR to do it, because that's absolutely one of the things you could do. It's expensive, but if you prioritize that, you can influence policy in your own state. So I would push that as well. Okay, so we're getting right up to the time here. Why don't we flip to the next slide? Obviously, here's the question and answer slide. Well, here's the email for disability statistics if you want more about that. Learn more, the Twitter handle, and flip the slide. Next slide. Closing remarks. Next slide. There you go. So please take the survey. It tells us what you think. We really care about what you think. We continue to book speakers for upcoming sessions. We continue to look for topics that you are particularly interested in hearing about. So please take the survey and let us know what you think, and if there are topics that you're interested in the future. Next slide. Thank you so much, everybody.